It was a chilly Friday evening when the streetlights flickered to life one by one. The small town of Brookdale was unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that made every car engine sound louder, every step echo longer. A young girl named Maya Carter was driving home after a long day of studying at the library. Her old silver Honda hummed softly as she drove through the empty road. The radio played quietly, and her tired eyes were focused on getting home to her mother. Maya was only 19 but carried herself with a maturity far beyond her age. She was in her second year of law school, determined, disciplined, and driven by a dream: to become a lawyer who fought for people who could not fight for themselves. She had faced discrimination before, but she always handled it with grace. She believed in the law, in fairness, in doing things the right way. But that night, fate had other plans. Officer Mark Reynolds was patrolling the same stretch of road. His shift had been dull and he was bored. He was the kind of officer who liked to feel powerful, someone who enjoyed control more than justice. His years on the force had hardened him, and his bias had become part of his routine. When he saw Maya's old Honda driving through the nice part of town, his suspicion woke up instantly. "What's a car like that doing here this late?" he muttered to himself. He didn't know who was driving, but he didn't care. He switched on his lights and siren. The red and blue glow cut through the darkness. Inside her car, Maya's heart skipped a beat. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. She looked in the rearview mirror and saw the flashing lights. "Oh no," she whispered. She quickly pulled over, rolled down her window, and took a deep breath. She had done nothing wrong, but she knew that didn't always matter. Officer Reynolds approached her car with slow, deliberate steps. His flashlight shined directly into her face, blinding her for a moment. "License and registration," he barked. His tone was cold, sharp, and full of authority. "Yes, officer," Maya said softly, reaching for her purse. She moved carefully, making sure both her hands were visible. "I'm just getting my license," she added politely. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he snapped suddenly, his hand resting near his holster. Maya froze, startled. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she said gently. "I'm just trying to give you my license." Reynolds leaned closer, his flashlight hovering over her face. "You look nervous," he said with a smirk. "What are you hiding?" Maya blinked, confused. "Nothing, officer, I'm just scared. I've never been pulled over like this." He chuckled under his breath. "You should be, young lady. It's suspicious for someone like you to be driving around this neighborhood at night. You don't look like you belong here." His words hit her like a slap. "Someone like you." Maya's heart sank, but she kept her composure. "I was studying at the library," she explained calmly. "I live on Elm Street. I'm just heading home." Reynolds scoffed. "Library? Sure you were. I've heard that one before." He leaned against her car, shining the flashlight across the seat and floor. "You hiding something? Drugs? Stolen property?" "No, officer," Maya said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly. "You can check the car. I have nothing to hide." He smirked again, enjoying the power he held over her. "Oh, I'll check, but you'll step out first," he ordered. "Hands where I can see them." Maya unbuckled her seatbelt slowly and stepped out into the cold night air. Her breath came out in soft white clouds. She could feel people from nearby houses watching through their windows. Reynolds began searching her car, throwing open the glove compartment, checking under the seats, even opening the trunk. Maya stood quietly by the roadside, humiliated. Her heart hurt more than her fear, not because of what was happening, but because of how normal it felt. When he found nothing, he looked frustrated. "So what's your story again?" he asked mockingly. "I told you," Maya said. "I'm a student. I'm studying law." He laughed loudly. "Law? You? Don't make me laugh, kid. You'll be lucky to make it through community college." Her chest tightened, but she stood tall, meeting his gaze. "Actually, I'm on a scholarship at the University of Brookdale," she said firmly. "Top of my class." That only made him laugh harder. "Oh, that's rich. Maybe one day you'll get to defend people like yourself, huh?" He leaned closer, whispering, "If you ever make it that far." Maya clenched her jaw but didn't respond. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her angry. He finally waved his hand. "Get back in the car," he said. "Next time, watch where you drive. People might mistake you for trouble." She got into her car slowly, closed the door, and sat there for a moment, hands shaking. When the police cruiser finally pulled away, the tears she'd been holding back finally fell. She cried not because she was scared, but because she was tired. Tired of being judged before being heard, tired of being looked down on because of her skin, her age, her gender. But as she wiped her tears, something inside her hardened, not in bitterness, but in purpose. She looked at herself in the mirror, her eyes still red but burning with determination. "One day," she whispered, "I'll stand where it matters, and I'll make people like him listen." That night, Maya didn't just drive home. She drove toward her destiny. She didn't know it yet, but the same officer who mocked her would one day stand in front of her again. Only next time, it wouldn't be on the roadside. It would be in a courtroom, and the tables would turn in a way he would never forget. 2 months passed after that night, yet Maya Carter could still remember every second of it. The flashing lights, the smirk on the officer's face, the coldness in his voice when he said, "You don't belong here." Those words had burned into her memory, not as pain anymore, but as motivation. During those weeks, Maya had buried herself in work and study. She didn't tell many people what had happened that night, not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't want pity. She wanted power, not the kind that controlled people, but the kind that changed things. The small-town courthouse was busy that morning. The echo of footsteps and the shuffle of papers filled the air. Officers, lawyers, and civilians moved through the hallways, each lost in their own world of cases and consequences. Officer Mark Reynolds arrived at the courthouse with his usual arrogance. His polished boots clicked loudly against the floor, his badge shining proudly on his chest. He greeted a few colleagues along the way, bragging about how he had handled a disrespectful teen weeks ago. "She was mouthing off," he said, chuckling. "One of those smart kids who think they know the law. I bet she won't forget the lesson I taught her that night." He had no idea just how right he was, but not in the way he imagined. As he entered the courtroom, he scanned the seats with casual disinterest. His confidence was unshakable, his smirk ever present. To him, this was just another day, another hearing, another win waiting to happen. On the opposite side of the room, Maya sat quietly at a wooden table, her hands folded neatly over a stack of documents. She wore a simple black suit and a crisp white blouse. Her hair was tied back, her posture straight, calm and confident. To most people in the room, she looked like a young intern or assistant, far too young to be taken seriously. But her eyes told a different story. They carried strength, patience, and purpose. When Reynolds noticed her sitting there, he paused for a second, his smirk returning. He leaned toward another officer and whispered with a laugh, "Would you look at that? She's back, guess she's here to watch me testify. Maybe she's still hoping to get sympathy from the judge." The other officer chuckled quietly. "Yeah, looks like she still hasn't learned her place." They laughed under their breath, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. The judge entered the courtroom and everyone stood. "Court is now in session," the clerk announced. Reynolds straightened his back, proud as ever, ready to testify. He believed this case, involving his questionable arrest, would be dismissed easily. But when the judge looked toward the defense table, he said something that made Reynolds' confidence shatter instantly. "Counsel for the defense, please state your name for the record." Maya stood up calmly, her voice steady and clear. "Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Maya Carter, representing the defense." The entire courtroom went silent. Even the judge blinked in mild surprise, looking at the young woman before him. Reynolds froze completely, his breath catching in his throat. Maya Carter? He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The same girl he had mocked, humiliated, and dismissed as a troublemaker was now standing across from him. As an attorney, not a victim, not a witness, but the person representing the defense in the very courtroom he thought he owned. For a moment, the world around him seemed to blur. The confident officer who once laughed at her was now speechless. He looked down, then back at her, as if expecting her to smirk, to throw his own arrogance back at him. But Maya didn't. She remained calm, professional, graceful. She didn't need revenge. She had truth. As the hearing began, the judge asked for opening statements. Maya walked to the center of the courtroom, her heels clicking softly against the floor. She spoke with quiet authority. "Your Honor, today we are here not only to seek justice for my client, but to remind this court that assumptions can be dangerous, that power must never replace fairness." Her words were measured but powerful. Even the jurors leaned forward, drawn in by her confidence. The same officer who once silenced her now had to listen, unable to interrupt, unable to intimidate. As she spoke, Reynolds sat stiffly at the witness stand, every word she said making him shrink a little more. He tried to focus, but all he could think about was that night, how he had talked down to her, how he had mocked her dream of becoming a lawyer. Now she was one. Standing tall, defending the truth, Maya didn't once look at him with hatred. Her tone never turned bitter. Instead, she presented the facts. Calm, professional, unstoppable. She played the dashcam footage, showing exactly what had happened that night. Her voice echoed through the courtroom. My client complied, remained calm, and showed respect throughout the encounter, yet the officer escalated the situation without cause. When the video showed Reynolds shouting, his own words ringing loud and ugly, "You don't belong here," the entire courtroom went still. Reynolds's face turned pale. He could feel everyone's eyes on him. The same confidence he wore like armor was now cracking apart. When Maya returned to her seat, she glanced at him briefly, not with anger, but with a quiet kind of victory, the kind that comes from knowing you didn't have to shout to be heard. He looked away, his throat dry. For the first time in his career, he realized the courtroom wasn't his battlefield anymore. It was hers. And as she organized her notes for the next argument, her expression calm and professional, he understood something he'd never thought possible. The girl he once mocked had just become the woman who held his career, and his pride, in her hands. The courtroom was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Maya Carter, the young woman who had just introduced herself as the defense attorney. Only moments earlier, most people in that room had assumed she was an assistant, maybe even a witness. But now, standing tall in her black suit, her voice calm yet commanding, she had shifted the entire atmosphere. Even the judge took a second glance at her, impressed by her confidence and composure. Officer Mark Reynolds, sitting stiffly at the witness stand, felt his stomach twist. It was as if the ground beneath him had cracked open, and the very person he had once looked down on was now standing above him. He blinked in disbelief, his mind racing back to that cold night, the flashing red and blue lights, and the trembling young girl who stood by her car trying to explain herself. It didn't seem possible that this poised, articulate woman was the same teen troublemaker he had mocked not so long ago. But there she was, the living embodiment of everything he didn't expect her to become. The judge cleared his throat. "Miss Carter, you may proceed." "Thank you, Your Honor," Maya said smoothly, walking to the center of the courtroom, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of truth. "Before I begin, I'd like to remind this court that justice is not about assumptions. It is about facts, fairness, and integrity." She turned toward the officer, her gaze steady, and today those facts will speak for themselves. The room was so quiet that even the soft hum of the air conditioner sounded loud. Mark shifted in his seat, clearing his throat, trying to appear composed. But his mind was a storm, flashes of arrogance, regret, and disbelief swirling together. The prosecutor, a man named Daniel Ross, tried to interrupt. "Objection, Your Honor. Is the defense making a speech or presenting a case?" The judge raised an eyebrow. "Overruled. Let her continue." Ross sighed, glaring at Maya, but she didn't flinch. She continued. "On the night of June 12th, Officer Reynolds pulled over my client under the pretext of a traffic violation. However, the dashcam and bodycam footage will show that no such violation occurred, and the stop escalated purely because of assumption and bias." She paused, letting her words settle in the room like dust after an explosion. Then she pressed play on the courtroom's monitor. The screen flickered to life, showing the footage from Reynolds's patrol car. The jurors leaned forward. There was Maya, the younger version of herself, sitting in her car, calm, polite, terrified. Then came his voice, loud, commanding, filled with authority and arrogance. Keep your hands where I can see them. What are you hiding? You don't belong here. The video ended, and silence followed. The only sound was the soft shuffle of papers as Maya turned back toward the officer. "Officer Reynolds," she said evenly, "do you recognize the voice in this footage?" His throat went dry. "Yes," he replied, barely audible. "And who does it belong to?" He swallowed hard. "Me." She nodded calmly. "Thank you." Then she asked, "Can you tell the court why you said, 'You don't belong here'?" to a citizen who was calm, compliant, and showed no sign of threat. He hesitated, his face flushing. "It was a misunderstanding." "Really?" Maya replied softly. "Because from what I can see, it looked like disrespect, not a misunderstanding." The crowd murmured quietly. The judge tapped his gavel for silence, but even he couldn't hide his curiosity. Mark looked down, avoiding her gaze. His hands clenched, his chest tight. He had faced criminals, lawyers, and judges before, but never felt this exposed. She wasn't yelling, she didn't need to. Her calmness made every word cut deeper. Maya took a few slow steps toward the witness stand, her tone still professional. "Officer Reynolds, would you say that as a member of law enforcement, you're expected to treat all citizens equally?" "Yes," he muttered. "Did you treat me equally that night?" He froze, the question hitting him like a slap. The entire courtroom waited for his answer. Finally, he looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't." Maya nodded. "Thank you for your honesty." There was no triumph in her voice, no arrogance. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply returned to her table, her dignity shining brighter than any victory. The judge leaned forward. "Miss Carter, I must say, your professionalism is commendable. Please proceed with your evidence." "Thank you, Your Honor," she replied gracefully. At that moment, everyone in the courtroom, from the jurors to the spectators, saw it clearly. Maya wasn't just a lawyer defending a case. She was a symbol, a living reminder of how far strength and grace can take someone who refuses to be broken by injustice. As she presented the next set of documents and statements, Mark couldn't look at her anymore. The man who once mocked her had been stripped of every layer of arrogance. He wasn't facing a teenager anymore. He was facing a professional, a genius, a woman who had turned pain into power. Every time she spoke, the sound of her voice made him realize something deeper. She wasn't there to destroy him. She was there to show him what justice really looked like. And though the courtroom was filled with people, for a moment it felt like only two were standing there. The man who once abused power, and the woman who had risen above it. By the time Maya ended her opening statement, there was no doubt left in anyone's mind. This wasn't going to be a normal trial. This was about something bigger than the law. It was about humanity, dignity, and redemption. And as she sat down, calm and composed, Officer Reynolds finally understood something he never had before. Justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wearing a suit, carrying truth, and answering to the name Maya Carter. The courtroom lights seemed brighter than usual that morning. The air was thick, not with noise but with anticipation. Everyone knew something big was about to happen, and at the center of it all stood Maya Carter, calm, collected, and quietly powerful. Officer Mark Reynolds sat at the witness stand, shoulders stiff, eyes darting toward the floor. The same man who once walked with swagger now looked smaller somehow. He still wore his uniform, but today it didn't look like authority. It looked like armor cracking under the weight of truth. The judge looked over his glasses. "Miss Carter, you may proceed with your examination." "Thank you, Your Honor," Maya replied, her voice smooth, polite, but firm enough to slice through the tension. She stepped closer to the witness stand, a folder of documents in her hand. "Officer Reynolds," she began, "you testified earlier that you pulled my client over because of a traffic violation, correct?" "Yes," he replied quickly, trying to sound confident. "What was the violation?" she asked. He hesitated. "She was driving below the speed limit." The courtroom stirred with quiet murmurs. Maya tilted her head slightly. Below the speed limit? She repeated. Are you saying she was driving too safely? The officer shifted in his seat. It was suspicious, he insisted. Maya raised an eyebrow. Suspicious? For driving carefully on a quiet road? The judge leaned back, trying to hide a faint smile. Maya opened the folder. Let's look at the dashcam footage from that night, she said, handing a USB to the bailiff. Moments later, the courtroom monitor flickered to life. The footage showed Maya's small silver car driving calmly down a near-empty road, the speedometer steady, the streetlights reflecting off the hood. Your Honor, Maya said, pointing to the screen. This video confirms my client was driving at 35 miles per hour. The legal limit, not below it. She paused for a moment, letting the truth hang in the air. So I ask again, Officer Reynolds, what made her suspicious? He cleared his throat, fumbling for words. It was late, and she didn't look familiar in the neighborhood. And by didn't look familiar, Maya asked calmly, you mean she didn't look like she belonged? The silence that followed was deafening. Reynolds' jaw tightened. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, officer? She asked softly. Her voice wasn't angry, but it carried power. The kind that comes from truth, not rage. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Maya took a deep breath and walked back to her table, pulling out another document. Let's move on, she said, to your report from that night. She held up a copy, the paper slightly trembling between her fingers. Not from fear, but from the weight of justice she was about to deliver. Officer, in your written statement, you claim that the suspect, my client, resisted your instructions and became verbally aggressive. Is that correct? Yes, he said quickly, hoping to sound firm. Perfect, Maya said evenly. Now let's listen to the audio from your body cam. The courtroom grew quiet again as the speakers came alive. Everyone listened. The sound of crickets, a car engine, and then a young, respectful voice saying, Yes, officer, I'm just getting my license. Then came Reynolds' voice, cold, harsh, and commanding. Keep your hands where I can see them. What are you hiding? You people always have excuses. The words echoed across the courtroom like thunder. Reynolds' face turned pale. The spectators whispered. The jurors exchanged glances. Even the prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Maya didn't move, didn't flinch. She let the silence work for her, because silence sometimes speaks louder than anger. After a long pause, she asked quietly, Is that your voice in the recording, officer? He swallowed. Yes. Did my client ever raise her voice, threaten you, or resist arrest in any way? He hesitated. No. So she was polite, calm, and cooperative the entire time? Yes, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Maya took a slow step closer, her tone still gentle. Then why did you call her suspicious? Why did you mock her? Why did you treat her like a criminal? He didn't answer. She leaned slightly forward, her voice lowering just enough to make everyone listen. Was it because of her car, her clothes, or because of the color of her skin? The courtroom went still. Even the sound of the judge's pen stopped. Reynolds looked up, guilt flashing in his eyes. I made a mistake, he admitted softly. Maya nodded. Yes, you did, she said. But it wasn't just a mistake, officer. It was a judgment, one that could have cost someone their dignity, or worse, their life. Her words carried no anger, just truth, raw and undeniable. The judge finally spoke, his tone heavy. Officer Reynolds, your behavior in this case is concerning. The evidence speaks for itself. Maya stepped back, exhaling quietly. Her job wasn't to humiliate him. It was to reveal the truth. She looked at him one last time, her voice soft but strong. The badge you wear should protect people, not belittle them. Justice begins with respect. And then she turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense rests its case. The courtroom erupted into murmurs again, people shaking their heads, whispering in disbelief. Some looked at Maya with admiration, others with quiet awe. Reynolds sat frozen, the weight of his own words crushing him. For years he had thought his uniform made him powerful. But today, he learned the hard way that true power doesn't come from a badge. It comes from integrity. As Maya walked back to her seat, calm and composed, she knew this wasn't just a victory for her client. It was a victory for every person who had ever been disrespected, dismissed, or doubted. She didn't raise her chin or smile proudly. She just whispered under her breath. The truth always speaks, even when people try to silence it. And at that moment, everyone in that courtroom, and including the man who once mocked her, knew she was right. The air inside the courtroom was so still that even the ticking clock on the wall sounded loud. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the young woman standing at the center of the room. Maya Carter, the once mocked teen, was now the calm storm that held everyone's attention. The judge gave a small nod. "You may begin your cross-examination, Miss Carter." "Thank you, Your Honor," Maya replied, her voice steady, her presence commanding yet gentle. She turned slowly toward Officer Mark Reynolds, who sat stiffly in the witness stand, his hands folded tightly as if holding on to the last piece of his pride. For years he had questioned people, interrogated suspects, and spoken with authority. But today, he was the one under questioning. And the truth was about to become his judge. Maya stepped closer, not with aggression, but with quiet confidence. "Officer Reynolds," she began softly, "you've been on the police force for over 10 years, correct?" He nodded. "Yes, that's right. So with a decade of experience, you must be well aware of the laws protecting citizens from unlawful stops, correct?" "Yes," he said, his voice lower now. "Then can you explain to this court why you pulled my client over when she had broken no traffic laws?" Reynolds shifted in his seat, his throat tightening. "I thought she looked suspicious," he said quickly. Maya tilted her head, her tone still calm. "Suspicious? In what way, officer?" He hesitated. It was late, and she didn't seem familiar in that neighborhood. She took a slow step forward. "Did you know that neighborhood is less than 2 miles from a public library?" "Yes," he admitted. "And are you aware that my client had just left that very library, where she studied until closing time?" He blinked, confused. "No, I wasn't aware of that." Maya nodded. "Exactly. You didn't ask. You didn't verify. You assumed." She turned to face the courtroom, her tone firm but not loud. And that assumption led to humiliation, intimidation, and the wrongful arrest of a young woman who had done absolutely nothing wrong. Reynolds' face flushed, his jaw tightening, but he stayed silent. Maya looked back at him. "Tell me, officer, have you ever stopped a white driver in that area for driving too carefully?" He froze. The silence in the courtroom grew heavy. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. "Answer the question, please," Maya said gently. He looked away. "No," he admitted at last. Her tone softened. "So, it is fair to say your decision that night wasn't about safety. It was about bias." He didn't respond. The truth didn't need words. It was already written all over his face. The judge leaned forward, eyes sharp. Maya continued. "Officer Reynolds, do you remember your words from the body cam footage?" He hesitated. "Some of them." She nodded. "Let me remind you, you said, you don't belong here." Gasps echoed quietly through the courtroom. Maya's voice stayed calm, but her words carried weight. "Tell me, officer, what did you mean by that?" Reynolds' shoulders sank. "It was a poor choice of words," he said quietly. "No," Maya replied softly. "It was an honest choice, one that revealed what you really thought." The officer looked down, shame filling the space that arrogance once occupied. Maya walked back toward her table slowly, then turned to face him one last time. "Do you know what's ironic, officer?" she asked, her voice firm yet filled with grace. "You told me I didn't belong that night on the roadside, but here I am, standing in the very courtroom where truth belongs, defending what's right, while you sit where justice demands you to be." The words hit him like thunder. For the first time, the proud officer had no defense, no authority, no voice. He could only sit in silence watching the same young woman he had once laughed at dismantle his arrogance with facts, calmness, and grace. The judge looked toward Maya, clearly impressed. "Miss Carter," he said, "you may continue." "Thank you, Your Honor," she said, flipping through a few papers. She then held up a printed transcript of his radio communication from that night. "Officer Reynolds, do you recall saying to your partner, and I quote, 'She looks like trouble'?" His eyes widened. "Where did you—" "It's in the public record," Maya interrupted, placing it on the judge's desk. "Straight from your department's own files." The judge's face hardened. "Is this accurate, officer?" Reynolds sighed. "Yes, Your Honor." "Then that's enough," the judge said sharply. "You've said more with your actions than your words." The tension broke. The courtroom murmured in disbelief. Some people smiled faintly. Others shook their heads in disappointment. Maya stepped back to her table, stacking her papers neatly. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried fire. Not of revenge, but of justice. She looked toward the judge and said quietly, "No further questions, Your Honor." As she sat down, Officer Reynolds exhaled slowly, realizing what had just happened. He had walked into the courtroom believing he was untouchable, but in front of the world, he had been held accountable. Not by someone powerful or famous, but by a young woman he once called trouble. Maya didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her victory wasn't about ego. It was about truth. And as the judge called for a short recess, the sound of her footsteps echoed softly through the room. It was the sound of change, of justice reshaping itself, of dignity taking its rightful place where mockery once stood. Officer Reynolds sat frozen, staring down at his trembling hands. The badge he once wore with pride suddenly felt heavier than ever, because for the first time he understood what Maya Carter had always known. True power isn't about how loud you speak. It's about how right you stand. The courtroom was silent again after the short recess, but this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy with tension. It was filled with truth. Everyone could sense it. Something had shifted, something irreversible. When the judge returned and took his seat, all eyes turned toward the front. Officer Mark Reynolds sat quietly at the witness stand, no longer leaning back in arrogance or smirking at the crowd. He looked smaller now, his confidence gone, his pride replaced by a quiet fear he didn't know how to hide. Maya Carter sat at her table, organizing her papers with calm precision. There was no pride in her expression, no hint of triumph. She wasn't here to humiliate anyone, she was here to finish what justice had started. The judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "This court has reviewed all submitted evidence, including the dashcam, bodycam, and the officer's radio logs." He paused, looking directly at Reynolds. "Officer, the facts are clear. The stop was unnecessary, your conduct was unprofessional, and your language was discriminatory." Reynolds looked down, unable to meet his eyes. The courtroom whispered softly, people exchanging glances. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The judge continued, his voice firm but controlled. "Such behavior is not only a violation of departmental standards, but an insult to the very oath you took to protect and serve without bias." He turned his attention to Maya. "Miss Carter, your representation and composure in this matter are commendable." "Thank you, Your Honor," Maya said quietly, her tone full of grace. Then the judge's expression hardened again. "Officer Reynolds, you are hereby found guilty of misconduct, false reporting, and abuse of authority. Effective immediately. You are suspended pending a full internal investigation." The words hit like thunder. Gasps filled the room. The same courtroom that once whispered about Maya as youth and inexperience was now whispering in awe of her courage. Reynolds's face went pale, his throat tightening. He wanted to speak, to explain, but the judge raised a hand. "I've heard enough, officer. You may step down." Slowly, Mark stood from the witness stand. For years he had walked tall in that uniform, believing it made him powerful, believing it made him untouchable. But as he stepped down, that uniform felt like a burden. The weight of his choices pressed down on him harder than the stares of the people in that room. He glanced once at Maya. The girl he had once mocked on the roadside, now standing strong and composed. There was no anger in her eyes, only quiet strength that somehow made it worse. When the judge adjourned the session, people began to stand and talk. Some congratulated Maya, others simply watched her in admiration. Her calmness was magnetic. She didn't celebrate, she didn't boast. She simply smiled politely, shook hands with her client, and began to pack her things. But before she could leave, she heard slow footsteps behind her. It was Reynolds. He stood there, his hat in his hands, his voice low. "Miss Carter." He began, his tone unsteady. "I wanted to say something." Maya turned to face him, her expression neutral, but kind. He took a deep breath. "I was wrong that night. In every way," he said quietly. "I judged you without reason, and I let my uniform blind me. I thought authority made me right, but it just made me proud." Maya looked at him for a long moment. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the cracks in his pride finally showing something real. "Remorse. Officer Reynolds," she said softly. "The fact that you can admit that means there's still hope." He nodded slowly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I just needed to say it." Maya gave a faint smile. "You don't owe me words, officer. You owe yourself change." Her voice was calm, not harsh. Her compassion caught him off guard. He blinked, unsure of how to respond. Finally, he nodded again, whispering, "Thank you." As he walked out of the courtroom, reporters swarmed him, cameras flashing, questions flying. But he didn't say a word. For the first time in his career, silence felt like the right thing to do. Maya stepped outside a few minutes later. The sky had darkened slightly, gray clouds rolling in, rain on the horizon, but she didn't mind. Each step she took felt lighter than the last. She looked up at the courthouse behind her. The same place that had once intimidated her as a child now stood as proof that justice could still breathe. Her phone buzzed, messages pouring in from classmates and colleagues. "You were amazing. You made history today." But Maya didn't feel like a hero. She just felt human, tired, proud, and at peace. Across town, Officer Reynolds sat alone in his car, staring at his badge resting on the dashboard. He ran his fingers across the metal, the same badge that once made him feel powerful. Now it reminded him of everything he had to change. He whispered softly to himself, "She belonged there, more than I ever did." And as he sat in silence, the first raindrop hit his windshield, small, gentle, cleansing, almost like forgiveness. Back at the courthouse steps, Maya opened her umbrella, the sound of rain pattering softly above her. She smiled faintly, not because she had won, but because justice finally had. And though no cameras captured that quiet smile, it was the moment that truly mattered, the moment when power bowed to truth, when arrogance fell to grace, and when a young woman proved that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't anger, it's justice served with dignity. Months had passed since that unforgettable day in court, but the story of Maya Carter and Officer Mark Reynolds had spread far beyond the small town of Brookdale. It became more than just a case. It became a conversation, a lesson, a spark of change that reminded people of something they had almost forgotten: respect, humanity, and second chances. The news had covered it everywhere. Headlines read, "Teen lawyer outsmarts racist cop in courtroom showdown." Videos of the trial went viral, shared across social media with millions of views. People around the country praised Maya's calmness, her grace, her strength. But Maya didn't see herself as a hero. She saw herself as a reminder. Every morning when she walked past her reflection in the mirror, she didn't see the frightened girl who once cried on the roadside. She saw a woman who had faced injustice and turned it into purpose. She had proven that dignity was louder than hate, that intelligence could silence arrogance, and that truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way home. But life had a quiet way of completing its circles. One cold autumn morning, Maya was invited to speak at a police ethics and justice seminar in the same county where it all began. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she wanted to stand in front of officers again, but then she remembered her promise to herself. to make people listen, not with anger, but with truth. So she accepted. When she walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. Rows of police officers, trainees, and supervisors sat waiting, their notebooks open, eyes fixed on her. She took a deep breath and began. "Justice isn't about who wears the badge or who stands in front of the judge," she said, her voice soft but steady. "It's about respect, for the truth, for each other, and for the power that comes with wearing a uniform." Her words hung in the air like poetry. Every sentence carried the weight of experience. She wasn't blaming, she wasn't scolding, she was teaching. "Every time you stop someone," she continued, "you're not just enforcing the law, you're defining it in that moment. How you speak, how you act, how you see the person in front of you, that is what shapes the trust between the people and the badge." The room stayed silent, some officers nodding, others avoiding her eyes. But one man sitting near the back was listening more closely than anyone else, Mark Reynolds. He hadn't worn his uniform in months. After his suspension, he went through mandatory bias and ethics training, community service, and hours of reflection. He had lost a title, but gained something far greater: humility. When the seminar ended, Maya gathered her papers, preparing to leave, but before she could, a familiar voice called softly, "Miss Carter." She turned around, and there he was, dressed simply. No badge, no gun, just a man trying to make things right. "Maya," he said quietly, "I didn't know you'd be here." She smiled faintly. "Neither did I, but I'm glad I came." He nodded, hesitating before speaking. "I've been working with a youth outreach program," he said. "We visit schools, talk to kids about equality, respect, and justice. I tell them about my mistakes, and about you." Maya was quiet for a moment, her expression softening. "That's good, Officer Reynolds," she said. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong. It takes strength to change." He smiled weakly. "You taught me that." For a moment they just stood there, two people from opposite worlds, now connected by a single truth: growth. He reached out his hand. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said, "but I do hope you'll accept my respect." Maya looked at his hand for a moment, then shook it gently. "Respect is all I ever wanted," she said quietly. As he walked away, she watched him go, not with anger, but with peace. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about transformation. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold and pink, Maya sat by her office window looking at the courthouse across the street. It was quiet now, just a building of stone and glass, but to her it meant something more. It was the place where she had found her voice, the place where arrogance fell silent, and the place where truth had finally been heard. She thought of her younger self that night on the roadside. Scared, humiliated, but still brave. That version of her had no idea how strong she was, no idea that one day the same man who mocked her would learn from her. Maya smiled softly, whispering to herself, "You did belong, all along." And as the city lights flickered on below, she knew this wasn't just her story anymore. It was a reminder to everyone that respect is stronger than rank, that change begins when pride ends, and that sometimes the greatest justice isn't found in punishment, but in forgiveness. Because in the end, true power isn't about how high you stand, it is about how humbly you rise.